Robert, you were in the recording industry, right?
Yes, sir.
Can you tell me about that?
Sure. Around 1986, my brother and I were doing a duo on Union Street in San Francisco, a club called the Tar and Feathers. And Joe played electric bass, and I played electric acoustic 12-string, and we sang a bunch of duets and Everly Brothers songs and stuff like that at an old 60s format club. And we'd been in many different bands and just dragging ourselves around the state of California trying to figure out how to have a career, a real career in the music business. I forever wanted to be in the record business. I don't know why, I just did. And suddenly, in the mid-'80s, I just got a wild hair and said, I'm moving to Nashville. And nobody believed I was actually going to do it. And Joe and I negotiated our way through that process, and then we loaded up everything that we owned in a Cadillac convertible and a Chevy van and a Toyota something or other that his wife drove, and we caravanned across the country to Nashville, Tennessee, where we knew one person. For me, that one person turned into the connection that got me into the studio business through a set of circumstances which I won't put on camera. The person I replaced was fired, and I was handed a wad of keys and pointed to 3 studios and was assured that somebody would help me figure this out. But my job basically was to set up the studio, tear down the studio, set up the control room. These were studios that had staff recording engineers, but we were also an open house that if you came in with a project and you had your own engineer that you wanted to use, then we had a staff like myself that would serve that person, help him get set up, learn his setup, set up the room the way he wanted. Every guy had a different approach. Everybody's system was different, and so we got to work around a great variety of guys who were very good at this. And I served in that capacity until what usually happens to a set, we were called a second engineer. A second engineer is not allowed to speak in a recording session. He is to serve the producer and the recording engineer. We do a lot of documenting. In those days, it was all analog, so we would line up all the machines so that, if you put a signal through one machine, it went through every machine at the same level. Those were real important technical things to master. And then you did a lot of documenting, tape splicing, taking cars to the car wash, picking up the producer's lunch, that kind of stuff. And you serve in that capacity and you stay. You're the first one to show up in the morning and you're the last one to leave at night. And even when you're dog tired after a big day in the studio, you stay extra hours and you practice and you pick up a tape and you put it on the machine and you learn how to mix and you try to copy what the guy who's better than you did and figure out how he got that cool sound. And so I did that for a few years like that, 17 hours a day, 7 days a week, until finally that moment comes in every engineer's life, if you've got the talent, where something accidental happens that shouldn't have happened, like the recording engineer booked on the orchestra date hit a telephone pole on his way to work and now can't come to the date, and we've got 45 people standing around getting paid union scale waiting for a recording engineer, and the producer turns and goes, "Can you do this?" And you go, "Yeah." And so that's how most recording engineers' careers start, accidentally. They were just there when something bad happened to somebody else, and you get put in the chair and you make it through the day, and somehow the producer was impressed. I could read scores. Most recording engineers don't read. So I could speak musically with the producer. That sped the process up. Engineers tend to be really numbers-based. I was measures-based. I could read the phrases. And it went well. And from that moment, a career as a recording engineer, which wasn't really planned, just happened. And I just went with it. And then there was a perception created because I was from San Francisco that I knew something about pop music that I didn't really know. But when people say that, "Oh, you're from San Francisco, you must be a pop guy," you just go, "Yeah." You just go with it. And so I got a lot of work that way, just because there was a perception, but mostly served quietly for a lot of years until the moment came where you got to shine. And then that's when it gets very competitive at that point, because the recording engineers that you served don't really want you to make the step up because they're losing a good service person. When you can assist, it's like a great dental assistant, you know. When you can read the other guy's thoughts and moves, and you're just quietly there doing all the stuff that you're supposed to do for them, they don't want to lose that because they have to train somebody. It's like a captain and a good first mate. We all have helped our first mates get promoted to captain, but we all hated to lose them too, because now we had to train somebody else to be that good, and that's not always possible. So, and that went on for a few years at the Sound Shop recording studio in Nashville, and then through a long story, which I will not bore you with, I became director of studio operations of Warner Brothers Records, and worked directly for President Jim Ed Norman, and operated and managed his private recording studio. And because it was Warner Brothers and it was Bugs Bunny, there was no such thing as being constrained by budgets. I was a gypsy in the palace. I knew it, and I received, Warner Brothers was finishing school. That's how I looked at Warner Brothers. And I remember walking in the doors going, man, when these people figure out I'm incompetent, this is really going to be brutal. But nobody ever did. And we ended up having a great run of luck and success, and it was a dream career. It started like dreams start, kind of accidentally sometimes, and it ended in the best possible way. I got to determine my exit. I was loved and respected and treated with great deference during that period of time, and still have many friends there that are in my place of retirement now, but were the heavy guys during the 90s, late 80s and 90s, and it was my honor to work with them and see them explode. We got to watch Garth Brooks explode. He just literally went from a demo singer to 1/3 of the industry literally overnight. People say that, and that's kind of, it's not always true, but in his case it literally was 6 months from the time that he was just another guy singing demos to suddenly he was an industry icon producing numbers like nobody had ever seen before. So I really did have a dream career. It was the best of what it had to offer, in my view. I met a lot of great musicians and songwriters, singers, and I'm not very starstruck. I hadn't been at that point. And then I had the opportunity to record Johnny Cash, and it was one of the first times I'd ever been completely dry-mouthed and unable to speak when he came into the room. And we're not talking about a guy who was on radio anymore. He'd been off radio a long time, and he was already ill, but he was still Johnny Cash. And he got booked to Michael Martin Murphey, a artist from the 70s, had a big hit called Wildfire. He had opened a division at Warner Brothers called Warner Western, and he got hired to produce an album for the American Quarter Horse Association called America's Horses. And so one of his things is he wanted to redo Johnny Cash's hit Tennessee Stud, and they wanted to do it in a very clever duet where there would be one key for Michael Martin Murphey, and then it would change keys, and then Johnny would come in and do his verse, and they would swap back and forth on the key change with the verse. And so Johnny Cash comes in the room, and he was dressed in black. He had a long coat. He had that wide-brimmed hat that he wore, and extended his hand and said, "I'm Johnny Cash." And I tried to speak, and I couldn't. And he said, "It's okay, son. You'll be all right." Now, there's kind of the Johnny Cash religion in Nashville, which I wasn't a part of. I certainly was aware of him, and I certainly had respect for him. But I became a member of that cult when I went into the control room and he went out to the microphone, and I heard that voice come through the speakers for the first time, and I realized what a consummate artist he was and how seriously he took it. And I'm telling you, that guy doesn't give it up until he gets exactly on tape what he wants. If anybody thinks that was his records were made while they were partying and goofing around, that guy is serious at what he did, and had great respect for it. Had great respect for all the people involved in the process, and it was an eye opener to me after being already in it that many years. To have that experience be so impactful was a big thing for me.
Why did you go from California to Nashville? What was it about Nashville that made you come out?
Well, when Joe and I were contemplating leaving California, the punk movement had sort of taken over. CBS Records had closed down their operations there, and some of the big studios that were doing record business, Fantasy Studios in Berkeley and Wally Heider's in San Francisco, they were no longer getting record business. So they now had to make the shift into custom work, jingles and work like that, demos. And so the whole landscape of the recording industry was changing. I wanted to have a real career. We were doing duos and small bands in many different San Francisco and Bay Area clubs, but it wasn't really, there was no path to success with that. It was, the path was clear. You're going to end up in your mid-40s, an alcoholic, and being in some smoky bar singing the same damn songs you've been singing for 20 years. I wanted something more. I was naive enough to think that I could do it. And with not a whole lot more thought than that, I convinced my brother, who was newly married, to pack up everything he owned, and I stuffed everything I owned in a 1970 Cadillac convertible, and we just headed toward Nashville. Now, the choice for Nashville was predicated on looking at the country geographically in terms of the music centers. San Francisco was going punk. LA was already there. I couldn't relate to that music at all. It was much too angry for my taste. Rock was dead. And so that left Memphis, that left Atlanta, that left New York, or Nashville. Nashville, though I wasn't a huge fan of country music at that point, I understood it. I knew that I could go there and I could learn how to do that. And naively, the lesson we did learn going there as San Franciscans, West Coasters, is that much like NASCAR, country music is a Southern sport, and a lot of pop artists whose career waned came to Nashville thinking, "Oh, country's easy. We'll just bullshit our way through country music." Well, most people who came to the country music scene with that attitude ended up not doing very well. I adjusted myself to it very quickly, realizing this was something you couldn't cheat. It was something you couldn't affect. It was something that had to come from your heart and soul. And the only way to make that happen was to immerse yourself in the culture of country music, which I humbly and happily did, as my brother did. And that's why he had the success in his career that he did, is because he approached it with humility and realized that this is a very unique art form, and it's geographic, and they're a lot smarter than anybody gave them credit for. I think a lot of pop artists come to Nashville thinking, it's hay bales and sucking on a straw. Those guys are quite smart, and believe me, I've seen them fleece a lot of money from New Yorkers and West Coasters who didn't even know they were bleeding until they left the room. They go, "Wow, I've been cut through the stomach and my wallet's gone. How'd that happen?" So again, the honor was mine to learn from these icons. And Joe and I hit Nashville just at the time where artists like George Jones weren't getting played in heavy rotation on the radio anymore, but they were still a force. Dolly wasn't getting played heavy rotation anymore, but she was still a force. I spent a lot of years working with Kenny Rogers in the same set of circumstances, trying to get him to the top of the charts on country radio again, which things change. They just change, and you're in and then you're out. And people try to hold on to being in longer than they probably should. They don't gracefully step out. But we at least had the opportunity to be part of 3 different generations of country artists walking through the doors of the studio. So the honor was always mine, and the education was always coming at me. I always felt there were certain types of artists that felt comfortable working with me, and there were certain types of artists who needed a more nurturing effect that I don't do, that didn't like working with me. I was pretty cut and dry and brutal about it. If it was happening, I would tell you it was happening. If it wasn't happening, I would tell you that too, and not always as diplomatically as some other guys would. And to be fair, it took some ego to face off with a major recording artist and tell him that was no good. You know, I didn't say it exactly that way when I worked with Barbra Streisand, but we were doing some vocals, and I pushed the talkback button and said, yeah, I think we've got everything we need to do this comp. Why don't you take a break and I'll comp this and then we'll take a listen afterwards. And she said, young man, when I've delivered the vocal that you need for your vocal comp, you'll know it and I'll tell you. Okay. I mean, you're Barbra Streisand. I'm not. So there were those experiences where you yielded to experience and talent, and sometimes you had to be reminded that you weren't the thing. You were just the guy in the room that gets to record the thing. You know, but that doesn't make you, I mean, it's certainly a talent and a skill, and there are those of us who do it way better than others. I feel confident I can say I was in the top 5 percentile of that profession, but it's still not like being a great piano player or a great guitar player. You're in the room recording the great guitar player, and that takes some skill to capture that, but it's not the same thing. So I always considered every day in that control room a gift, because I got to be there. The most fun, and I don't know where I developed this habit. I had not seen anybody else do it, but I just got in the habit of dedicating one tape recorder. I had an assistant engineer that would load that thing up with tape, put it in record, and keep tape running through that thing the entire length of the session from the moment the guys walked into the room. There was an open mic, and it was recording all the conversations, but more important, the jokes. These guys were just big kids, you know, telling jokes all day long and doing ape impersonations on the floor. And you know, you look at these guys and go, what a wonderful opportunity to never have to grow up. You just get to play music and never have to really grow up. So it was my habit to keep that machine going, but more for what I used to call the spontaneous combustion that would take place after a take. When in those days, most of the records were fade endings. And so the players would give you enough vamp choruses where they knew the engineer had enough room to fade the record. And when they knew that they had reached that magic moment, they would just blow into spontaneous combustion, because you're talking about the finest players on planet Earth, not just in country music. They can play anything, and they can play it with authority, and they end up making the same 5 records day after day. So when they finally get a chance to show what they've got, they hit the throttle. And so that's what that tape recorder was on for. So when they hit the throttle to release that tension, you never knew what you were going to get. You know, the piano player would throw in a Chick Corea lick or something. I mean, they would jump on that shit like man-eating sharks. And I captured years of that stuff just from having that tape recorder in go mode. So to me, the unexpected was, I always knew what songs we were going to record going into a session. They didn't. And so the art came in watching them discover the song for the first time through a demo, sometimes a very crude demo, sometimes a produced demo. And then now they're the core band that's going to take that to the next level. They're going to turn that into a master recording. And it's done with great skill, but it's also done very casually. They do what we call head arrangements. They'll be making their charts, and they'll be making notation on the charts as they're listening to the demo. And then on their way out to the cutting room, they'll say, okay, you do this, you put a Batman on that, and I'll take the second ending. And you know, they kind of work it out in their head. They play through the intro, the first verse, and the chorus, and Eddie Bayers, the drummer, will say, all right, let's cut this. Boom. Hit record made right in front of your face. a lot of first takes, mostly second takes, but the magic would happen right in front of you, and you couldn't help but be moved by that every single day. And I've had projects that I took out a blank piece of tape and turned in a finished record, and I cried every time that thing got played till the very end. I couldn't make it through a playback without getting emotional about it. That's when you know you had something. If I can listen to something 3,000 times and still cry, there's something on there. And so the luck was all with me that I got to be in the room with those kind of guys. It was just one of those silly accidents that shouldn't have happened that did, and nobody figured out I was stupid.
It's a big change from where you started. You wanted to play music, and then you got into the engineering part of it.
Yeah, and that was not by plan per se. Joe and I went there to try to be a duo. In fact, we had actually been offered a development deal with a major label, and that we ended up not participating in that for a number of reasons. When I moved off of that plan, I knew I wanted to stay. I knew that the studio excited me. I understood what was supposed to happen in there. I understood signal flow. I knew it was human, microphone, cable, socket, patch bay, console, tape recorder, speakers. Got it. And without very much technical knowledge, I just was good at making stuff sound good. Don't know why. I'd always been messing with stereos my whole life, and I just had a natural feel for it, and that was eventually validated by a community of very critical listeners who also agreed that I had a natural gift for it. And I tried not to talk too much so as to, make it clear that I was ignorant. I kept my ignorance about the technical process of recording pretty circumspect for a long time until I actually figured it out. And I just got by the seat of my pants mixing because I just knew how to make something sound good. How did you figure that out? I just took that knob and turned it back and forth until it sounded better. When it did, that's where I left it.
You must have a really good ear for this.
I think I do. I think it's fair to say I do. I don't think I have better hearing per se than most humans. I just have more focused, trained hearing. I can hear things in a record that most people don't hear. I can't. Well, today things are different, but very few records are completed without a mistake in it somewhere. There's something. There's some little thing in there somewhere, and I hear them all. You can't get that cheese past me at all. And I don't know why. I don't know why I have that kind of detailed hearing. I can go in. Everybody listens to music differently. Most people listen to the lyrics and the vocalists, and because I was also involved in production, I'm building the record from a foundation that the singer gets to sing to. So I'm listening to that kind of detail. And then when you get the record built, then when you're mixing, it's painting with sound. And that takes you into another level, a deeper level of hearing. I can't listen to music the way most people do. I'm better at it now that I'm not doing this professionally anymore, but there was a time that the very first thing I'd go for in my listening was, well, I'm going to find the mistake in there because it's in there somewhere. Ah, there it is. There it is. That I would move on to other things. When I was actually working on records, the least fun that I had was when it was time to record the singers. I liked all the parts about building the record better than actually working with the vocalists, because once they got there, then the whole cool vibe changed. It was now about them being the artist. It wasn't about the magic. The magic has already taken place before they got to it, in a lot of cases. So I have a weird perspective. I've listened to lots of records and mixed lots of records over and over and over again and got the record perfected before I inconvenienced myself with having to put the vocal in there. I was like, all right, we're at that point now. I gotta listen to the singer. But I can assure you, I've listened to most records I've mixed thousands of times, and I probably couldn't tell you the title, and I probably couldn't repeat one lyric, because I listened to the vocal to the extent where I placed it in the mix where it belongs, so that whoever wanted to listen to the lyrics could hear all the lyrics. but that's not what I listened for. I just, placement was where I put it. You know, it's working great there. Everything's transparent. It's got nice echo content, nice reverb, little delay here, a little up. It's all working. What was the name of the song, Bob? I have no clue. It's just not what I was listening to. And that makes me a unique listener. I don't know if that's a correct way, but that's just the way that I listened. You know, I went inside and let everybody else enjoy it from the outside.